I guess we're doing skills now. If you see my last video yapping about Flak's domination skill, you know that I'm a pretty big fan of that skill and just confusion in general within this series. But Flak isn't the only one with confusion inbuilt into their skill trees, because Amara also has one in her Glamour augment. This augment unlocks at tier 5 in her green skill tree and makes it so that any enemies damaged by your action skill become confused, making them target their allies. When it comes to grasp, this will also apply to nearby enemies. The duration of this confusion is 8 seconds, as well as taking this augment increases your action skill cooldown by 20% and the skill damage is reduced by 10%. Let's start out with the positives here, because Glamour is a very cool skill. As I said, I love confusion as a mechanic, and I think that it offers a hell of a lot in terms of utility that other mechanics may not. And having multiple different ways of accessing that mechanic is incredibly nice to have, especially for characters that don't otherwise have any sort of aggro control like Amara. Having that built into her skill tree is incredibly nice and in theory should be incredibly useful. While Amara does have access to other forms of CC, they're mostly tied to her red and purple tree. Red being hard CC through grasp and purple being hard CC through a lot of buffs to cryo damage. But purple is a bit more of a niche tree, and while red is very widely applicable, not every build ever wants to use grasp. And so again, in theory, this is where Glamour should be able to slot in incredibly well. But that's precisely where the problems with Glamour come in, with how difficult it is to actually slot into a build and the cases in which it actually makes sense being incredibly rare. First and foremost, the number one issue with Glamour is literally just how deep it is in green tree, which green itself is likely the single most specific use case tree Amara has, especially in the later half of it. A vast majority of the more general use skills that she has in that tree are right there at the top. Very few builds ever want to go this deep, and those that do likely don't want Glamour for one reason or another. Green tree is most often used for melee. Aggro control during melee could be incredibly good, and likely this is the best case scenario for Glamour. However, melee generally likes taking damage. Burn Both Ends and Mindfulness both give you buffs for taking damage and taking aggro. Burn Both Ends specifically also just full overrides any aggro control that you could actually gain from Glamour if you're using them together. So you have to choose between a pretty solid damage source and CC that you don't even really need. Lots of builds, effectively any build ever that uses blue tree, likes to use Laid Bare. Laid Bare applies to things hit by your action skill. Glamour also applies on things that your action skill hits. Any build that makes use of Laid Bare isn't really going to want Glamour, because Glamour wants you to let those enemies survive and take aggro, while Laid Bare wants you to shoot and kill those enemies. A little bit of a anti-synergy there. Luckily though, because Laid Bare doesn't really apply well through grasp, red tree grasp builds could maybe make some use out of this. But grasp is already hard CC, especially when used with things like stillness of mind, as it most often is. So you really don't have a need for this softer CC when anything that you CC with grasp is probably going to die anyways, especially if you're using ties that bind. As well, again, that problem with going so deep into green tree, there's very few builds that run grasp and want to go that deep into green. Glamour also just isn't that good of an application of confusion. It's tied to action skill cooldown. Unlike Flak's dominance, Amara can't proc this whenever the fuck she feels like it. But not only is it on a cooldown, the actual duration itself is the lowest in the entire game, at least at base. Flak's dominance, which while granted can only be applied to one enemy at a time, is very spammable and able to have a 100% uptime, is at 12 seconds for most enemies and 24 seconds for beast enemies. The Mesmer, a grenade which you only need to worry about grenade ammo for and is able to apply to any amount of enemies hit by it, is 10 seconds. The only other comparable thing with a lower duration is Flak's Not My Circus, making their pet taunt when Fade Away ends, which lasts for about 6 seconds. But even then, Flak has way more CDR available to spam the shit out of Fade Away for a near constant uptime on that as well. If you can't get value out of 8 seconds of soft CC or 12 seconds of it with Ascendant that negatively interacts with multiple skills, then Glamour isn't for you. And of course, I just mentioned it, this isn't the only way that Amara has to access confusion. She can also use the Mesmer, again providing AoE confuse that can be slotted into literally any build ever. And unlike Flak, where that's a pretty heavy commitment due to how much other utility is available to them through the grenade slot and how little they have in their trees, Amara already has a fuck ton of access to other utility to where that slot is pretty damn open 99% of the time to whatever you want to jam into it. Need more CC for your build? Yeah, very rarely is there any downside to just slamming a Mesmer in there. It procs easier and with a better method is more controllable and isn't tied to your action skill cooldown. The only other way that you are able to apply Glamour is through the Ice Spiker prefix on your artifacts, because for whatever reason the damage type of the Ice Spiker is Amara action skill. This lets you be able to apply Glamour on Slam, but you can't refresh it with your Slam as the Ice Spiker will not hit enemies that are already under the effects of Glamour. But along with that, it's also just generally incredibly janky and a very odd synergy that for the most part you're now taking your prefix instead of your grenade slot, which generally for Amara, a prefix is probably more important. And with all that being said, I've made Glamour sound like utter dog shit. And to be clear, in 99% of situations, it is. It is an obscenely heavy investment required for something that likely isn't going to provide you the same value as putting those points somewhere else in almost any situation ever. But there is that 1% of the time when Glamour might actually just be exactly what you're looking for. And of course, that's the purpose of this video, to say that while Glamour is expensive, unsustainable, anti-synergistic, and niche as all hell, that niche does exist, and it's something to consider the next time you're thinking up an Amara build. Or hell, if you're just looking to have fun with an incredibly underused skill that has a very specific niche, then even if it ain't optimal, you can still have some fun with it. That's gonna about do it for this one though. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, definitely consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, all that. I'll be live right after this video goes up, right here on YouTube and also over on my Twitch channel, where there will be a link to down in the description below, and just under that is a link to my Discord server where you can come and join and hang out. But with that all being said, I hope to see you guys in the next one.